And so you've got that same principle, like you're saying, is that vroeg ryp, vroeg vrot. I actually used that example with Holly last night because there's someone Holly knows that's a friend who is going down that road. And ironically, Dad, I used that exact phrase last night, and Amanda explained to Holly what it means, and we encouraged her to be careful when this person is around her or says things that she needs to check with us. Is it okay? Because this person's in a hurry to grow up before their time as a young girl. So ironically, that's exactly what we were dealing with too. So yeah, manipulating the natural order of things is a form of magic, and that can be good or bad. As I've already said now, using analogies and stories and using music, as Kathy's pointed out previously, using anything effectively, using your intelligence to influence people is a form of magic. And that's either good or bad, as with most things in the world. It's going to be one or the other. So if you guys have read this, the message on the screen here now, doesn't it sound like a strange statement? Jesus draws a crowd of magicians. Who wants to tell me what you think I'm about to describe here?
The apostles.
Now, before that, let me do it this way. The last word, just read the first four letters of the last word.
Magi.
So Jesus draws a crowd of magi. What does that make you think then?
Well, the Magi I think, refers to the wise men, the
Yes,
king.
that's it. At the time of his, well, not at the time of his birth because they weren't there when he was born, but within a year or two of his birth, yes, they were there. Now let's just carry on with our little word game, yeah. Um, take the first five letters of the last word, and what does it imply?
Magic.
Look at that. Jesus
Yeah.
draws a crowd of course, we can't use it this way, magic, but I just want you to see the words there. The Magi were magicians. That's literally what they were. So here's a quote from Victor Paul Verville, which I'm imagining is Dutch or German or some mix of it. When Zoroastrianism became prominent in Persia, many magi adopted it as their own and became the priesthood of that religion. Following the death of Zoroaster, the magi splintered into two major sects: those who continued following the religion of Zoroaster, the Eastern Magi, and those who return to the ancient forms of nature worship, especially emphasizing sun worship. That should be interesting to you. Why does Matthew tell us the wise men came from the east? No, he doesn't tell us actually. Why does he tell the original audience? Can I tell you why? I think they knew these were Zoroastrianist priests, and he wanted to
This
make
is
sure
where
they know which side of it was.
this is where I get really interested in it because I'm doing a bit of a study on the star, the constellations of alignment with the Magi, and there's some incredible uh, stuff going on in the heavens at this time. But would the Magi, I know they're from the east, from Persia, but would they have been Jewish? I
No,
strongly believe.
I don't
You
think
don't think
so.
so?
No, and I'll tell you why too. Um, you know that there's actually a prophecy that says the Magi, literally prophecy from the Old Testament, says that Magi will bring gifts to the Messiah. You know that? It's literally a prophecy. Maybe if one of you want to Google it, you can find it for me because I can't tell you the reference offhand. So if someone wants to look for that, the prophecy in the Old Testament about the Magi bringing gifts to the Messiah, and you should find it. So there's that, Gary, that tells me that they weren't Jewish. There's also the fact, well, there's more than one. There's also the fact that when Daniel ends up becoming the head of the Magi, and I'll quote something on that here too. And we know that the Babylonians weren't Jews. So if he's getting into that, he's not dealing with Jews. And obviously he's evangelizing them, which is probably exactly why God put him there to begin with. Um, and then to the big evidence for me, which obviously people would say speculation, and that's fine. I don't mind, they can say it because here's what I believe. I believe that Jesus was born at tabernacles. And for me, the idea of Gentile priests, of Gentile magicians coming to acknowledge the birth of a Jewish king is in perfect step with what should happen at Sukkot, at Tabernacles, because we know that's when what happens? The nations are invited to come and worship with Israel.
Not just that, there's obviously conjunctions around that time as well,
Right.
prior
So,
to the Magi
I mean,
coming to Jesus.
isn't it like obvious? And what else do we know about the prophecies in Zechariah? That they will have to send the political ambassadors to Jerusalem. And what would they have to do at that time? They'll have to acknowledge Jesus as king. That's the prophecy that's going to happen at Tabernacles. So, my heavens, doesn't it, excuse the pun, doesn't it make sense that Gentile magi should come and give gifts and acknowledge the king of Israel at Tabernacles? I mean, sounds to me as clear as Tron as a window that's been washed. So why were
Looking
the
at
magicians involved in Jesus' story? Sorry, Kath, is that Kathy?
about the Magi, looking on Google, there is nothing. All there is just magicians, magic, and magicians, magic of thinking, all that sort of thing.
I don't have my phone with me, so I can't even check on that without going off the screen here. So I'll save that for just now when people are commenting. I'll
Okay.
give you I'll find the reference of that. Here's another
Thanks.
quote that's worth hearing. Zoroastrians believed in one supreme God who created the heavens and the earth, who authored all that is good. They also believed in a spiritual adversary who authored evil. They believed in a coming redeemer, a prophet who would be sent by God to save mankind. They strictly forbade the worship of idols. They believed in angels and in the devil's spirits and in eventual triumph of good over evil. They set forth a system of laws and ethics stressing a strict code of moral behavior. Good grief. Let's go back and check that question. Why were the magicians involved in Jesus' story? I think that tells you why. These guys had maintained separately to Israel a form of monotheism that was so noteworthy it caught God's attention. And while giving Israel a hiding prophetically in Babylon, Daniel suffering unfairly in that process, but his credibility to serve God, kind of like Jesus would, and suffer even while serving the Father, gets then used to not only in the negative sense of being suffering under that system, but then gets the opportunity placed by God to put him in that position to not only influence the Babylonian kingdom and the crossover, but also to predict what's going to come in the future generations of the nations against Israel, which then gives the basis of prophecy prior to Hanukkah happening, explaining the spirit of the Antichrist, then also giving John a basis of his revelation in the book of Revelations, explaining all of that that's going to happen. And then on top of that, if you can believe that it can get any better than that, he also is, and this is just, of course, a midrash speculation, but I believe it to be true, and I will teach it as factually as I can, because I believe it to be safe enough to do that. I also believe that Daniel gave his gifts, prophetic gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and entrusted it to every generation of magi that came after that in that school to take it to Jesus when they see those events in the sky, which obviously this generation did. And what did that then, on top of this, as never mind a triple conjunction in the sky, how about a freaking hexagonal, I don't know how you want to call it, quadruple times two, whatever multiplication of incredible events this can be. When Mary presents Jesus at the temple, who can tell me what does the turtle doves that she takes as the sacrifice imply about her?
Doesn't it mean she's poor?
It means she's dirt poor. You know what she's supposed to take, ironically? A lamb.
Lamb.
Ironically, she had the lamb there. But my point is this.
So she didn't obviously naturally, if she had the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, or the gold to give in a material sense, she would have taken that up as a
She could have been,
offering.
she could have been like the drunk guy in a bar that gives everyone around a drink, to which they'll go, yay! She could say, lambs on
Yeah.
me. Or maybe she'd be like
Yeah.
Oprah. She can't do that for a very simple reason. And here goes the nativity cards and nativity scenes for years to come.
Well, she didn't have the gift. The gold wasn't delivered yet.
They hadn't come yet. Oops.
Yeah.
So
Which puts the timeline. Jesus was at least a year and a year and a half, maybe.
yeah, no, well, without question. So Daniel's influence. And anyway, the point is, she goes from being dirt poor to, after getting the gifts that I believe are from Daniel, that's passed down generation to generation, they become ridiculously rich. And that's why they could flee to Egypt with ease and live for years. I mean, that's just an interesting. And my point is, how much was God able to manipulate from so many angles to pull all of this together? What does that make God? The ultimate magician. It's another quote from Joseph Leonard. Because of Daniel's God-given ability to interpret dreams and visions, he was appointed by Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4 verse 9, and later by his son Belshazzar, to be chief of the magicians, or master of the magi, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Daniel 5:11. Later, Daniel also served in the courts of the Medes, King Darius, that's Daniel 9 verse 1, and the Persians, King Cyrus, Daniel 10 verse 1. Daniel had a remarkable term of service in these eastern courts, service that was clearly orchestrated by God. I agree fully with that.
So, Darren, how did Daniel, a man that was so revered of the Torah, how did he manage the fine line balance between what the Torah prohibits in terms of sorcery, that sort of thing?
Well, he had the Spirit of God infused in him. I mean, look, when him and his friends eat a different diet, what's the result? See, we can't assume that the Spirit wasn't as active as he can be today with us in selected stories like Daniel's back in that time. So this man is when you're anointed, you felt it, Gary, Kerry's felt it, we've all felt this, Nande, Kathy, Dad, you've all felt when the Spirit takes over and either gives you supernatural insight or gives you supernatural peace or supernatural confidence. Anyone ever felt anything that wasn't natural and turned out to be incredibly favorable for something that you could give God glory for? Give me just a yes. You don't have to even explain what it was. Has it ever happened to you? For me, it's a yes.
Yeah.
You see, so just think of what's happened for you and allow it to happen for Daniel, and he's sorted. Comfortably sorted. In fact, Daniel saw so much it disturbed him, which is why in his prophecies he asks for, like, just tell me what I'm looking at right now. Like it even makes it into the text. So you're right. This stuff is incredibly fascinating. The stuff about the Magi and that too. And it's heartbreaking that Christians will spend more time choosing who baby Jesus is going to be because there's 3 babies in the church than actually exploring this.
The greater cosmic story. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at. That's why I've said it's a kind of magic. That's what I'm getting into with this. We've got to explore the bigger picture, because you know what it does? It makes God bigger, and it makes Jesus bigger, and it makes more of the text, and some of the strange references make sense. We are still on that journey, and we'll never leave it. So here's the last thing I want to say. Mark Twain, spellbound. Listen to what Mark Twain said about Jews. If the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1/4 of 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of. He has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also very out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persians rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded into the dream, stuff and passed away. The Greeks and Romans followed and made a vast noise, and they were gone. Other people have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now, and have vanished. The Jews saw them all, survived them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert but aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jews. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? So this is something Mark Twain wrote that was published in the National Jewish Post and Observer on the 6th of June, 1984. So this was published in 1984. This quote is taken from there. So, I mean, that's saying a lot about Jews, and it starts getting eerie, doesn't it? And you know what my answer to it is? And it's something Nande often laughs about when he watches me in action and when he sees my reaction to things. It does seem to be that us Jews have an unfair advantage in ways that are just odd and unexplainable. And we do take it as Jews probably for granted most of the time. And that irritates people who don't have it. But the thing is, you're not actually fighting with us, you're fighting with God, because everything Mark Twain says here is true, and he's puzzled by it, but he's made peace with the puzzling nature of it. So I've got an answer for Mark Twain, and you know what the answer is? You might have guessed. It's a kind of magic. And with that, I conclude. So I think let's start with my dad, and then Kathy, and then Gary and Kerry, and then Nande. Knowing, of course, that the last group of you won't have as much to say because you missed some of the starting point. So it's up to Dad and Kathy to point out anything that they think is worth saying to you before you listen to the recording. So, Dad, you want to get started?
All I want to say, it's kind of magic. Good magic.
Well, it was very interesting. Very, very interesting. You brought out some words like Nakash, is it? Nakash?
Nachash,
Serpent.
yes.
And that's from Genesis 3:1, where he was more crafty than all the beasts in the field. And oh yes, with magic, manipulation, sleight of hand, occultism, and deception, but also faith and supernatural. All of the points I've got are all interesting in their own way, and we're, you know, some things are relative to some of us, and some of it to others, and it's really interesting when you bring out all sides of things, because, like for myself, I will think in a certain direction, and from past experience, from environment and all that. But what is good is when you bring out other sides, other facets, because well, it broadens our scope and can cause more understanding of of how some people arrive at where they are in their life and others don't. I liked the description of Hollywood. That was quite interesting, very interesting, I should say. And being the type of wood used to make wands, that's amazing. Zodiac, people who go. Well, there's a lot to think of, and I've appreciated hearing the different sides of this, of magic, manipulation, and faith.
Okay, well, that's awesome. I'm glad.
Yeah, really good. Thank you so much. There's a lot to think about. Oh, right at the end, you had Mark Twain spellbound, ? What was the answer?
Well, Mark Twain was saying all of those amazing things about Jews and it doesn't
Oh,
make sense and whatever. And my answer was literally, it's a kind of magic.
Yeah. Yeah. What another
Okay.
thing that was good was that you allowed magic to be good or evil. Can be good.
Kathy, it can be good in the sense of the original secret knowledge, what we'd call it, of the watchers that they misused, that God had put in place, and they were probably meant to disseminate in time and space according to God's will, but they didn't do that. So they manipulated that system, and Adam and Eve, of course, got caught up in that same process. And that's
Yeah.
literally then why the whole negativity of the word magic comes to be, because by a large degree, yes, the overwhelming nature of magic, so to speak, does carry a negative connotation. So
And
I'm
God
not
knew this
denying that its primary meaning today is negative, but I'm saying we're going to expand the horizon to understand that the essence of what is negative actually comes from what God made good and the
Yeah.
misuse of it. So yeah.
And God, and that in itself is good because God gave us free choice and he wanted us to choose him. But he didn't want to make us robots choosing him. And so to give us choice meant he had to allow any side of things to be known. And it's a blessing to know when you choose God. And it's sad to see others that don't.
Right.
I've appreciated this very much. Enjoyed it. I liked what you said when I told you what my daughter thinks. She's not around, don't worry. No, she isn't. And oh, it's just so good. What was the other thing there? Oh, the zodiac. Yeah, the planets and heavenly beings. That was interesting. And the way that the moon and possibly other planets affect moods, tides, enhance demonic activity, that sort of thing. Yeah. So thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. And yeah, I appreciate it all.
Okay.
Really good.
Thank you. Gary and Kerry.
Okay, so could it be said that the whole thing with the connection with faith, you know, like having faith, it looks like that similar sort of concept. Could it be that when we read near the close of all things and the will to come in eternity, after the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua, which is coincidentally seen in the prophets about the stars. The scepter will not depart from Judah, you know? That literally can be seen in
Right.
that was one of the, I believe, one of the signs in the heavens the Magi saw, and that was their cue to leave for Bethlehem, for Jerusalem. So in eternity, is it possible that there is no more faith required, there is no more magic required, which means equals 2, hence we don't see the sun, the moon, and the stars, the heavenly bodies, cease to exist. We get a new order because God dwells amongst us.
That makes sense to
And
me.
so there is no faith, there's no magic required anymore because we have now entered eternal magic. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, again, it depends on the use of the term magic. And yes, I am deliberately trying to redeem the concept, but not for its own purpose, for the purpose of showing God's cosmic, as you said it, design. That's why I'm doing it.
I just find it interesting that that is the close of play, is that there's no, the heavens, what we know in the order of the cosmos ceases to exist. A new order is formed. So the close of the whole cosmic story finishes, it closes, it ends.
Spot on, yeah.
Yeah, really interesting, Darren. So much food for thought, as always. Yeah. I've always put, I think, most believers in Yeshua do think we have negative connotations attached to the word magic. But yeah, it really has given me a lot to think about. And I think there's still so much unrevealed, and I don't really, in a sense, I don't want to know a God I can completely understand. So
Right.
yeah, it's incredible. Just it probably has nothing to do with this teaching, and maybe in a way it does, but many years ago I worked for a woman who was a sorcerer, for want of a better word. She was a medium. She practiced Reiki, combination of other things. It's a team of 13 of us. She one day revealed, I actually overheard this through other people. Part of her practice of new staff members is by reading their minds, their futures. She apparently got to me, and I was the only Christian of the workforce at that time, and she couldn't break through something she said was a barrier.
There we go.
I just found it really interesting that it's always I've always wondered what was different. And she said, and now I know, I think that magic that God is inherently from the Lord can obviously be perverted for other causes.
Right.
But ultimately, it's under his judicial system, and she couldn't go past a certain point with me. In fact, she couldn't read anything about me at all. And they actually, in the months after that, she let me go. She found reasons to remove my targets and things, and she manipulated the books to such a point where they actually put me on a formal performance management, and eventually I was let go for no good reason.
That makes sense.
I just found that really interesting.
You're right. You see, so discernment can be on the dark side too. She had discernment, but limited. Enough to know that there's something attached to you, but not enough to know what it is.
No. Yeah, it's always stuck with me. But obviously that was not the right place to be, and I'm really happy I didn't work there. I wasn't happy there anyway, but yeah, interesting. Yeah, thanks, Darren.
Okay. Nande.
I'm not surprised what Kerry says, because again, in South Africa, just generally the black culture, any usually black person that gets saved isn't unaware of the supernatural realm and stuff. And I remember back when I was still working linkside with Darren, there was a particular student teacher who was, Darren know who I'm talking about, who was dealing heavily with ancestral worship and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if you remember this lady, Darren.
I'm trying to think now.
Bongi was very afraid of her.
Oh, yes. Okay, I do.
And I remember her having them saying, apparently, this is what, and then Bongi explained this to us, being very, I don't want to say trouble, but having difficulty reading and manipulating in the spiritual realm, quote unquote, Darren, for some reason. I don't know if you remember that.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I remember Pongo was very scared for your life and everything like that because she's very powerful and in tune. And I will never forget what you said. God, I think it took her by surprise. Maybe she thought you were being like just ignorant, but it came up to fruition. It's like, oh, don't worry, I'm Jewish. Yeah, I remember her being laughing my head. But she ended, I remember her after a couple of days, we still talk from time to time. Her saying, it never did work, whatever she tried to do with you. It ended up happening to another female teacher, if you remember. Um, I forget her name now. But the blonde one, blonde, short teacher there. But yeah. Uh, here's my question then, in terms of, in Torah, and specifically, you see an example of this. God bans witchcraft. What would be the parameters of diversion into witchcraft, and then what Jesus and all the prophets were doing, which would be called that witchcraft, or what Moses was doing? What is this particular practice that is in the supernatural and that God is particularly banning, that is called? Because I'm guessing there's a lost in translation and cultural element that we miss when we get the witchcraft, specifically witchcraft, that word.
Okay, let me give you an example that's different but will carry the same idea across. Until the time where Moses puts it into writing in the Torah, very close cousins and family members could marry and have sex.
Yes.
And then God says to Moses, okay, tell them they can't anymore. So if so-called brothers and sisters and close relatives had sex before that, was that a sin?
No,
So what defined it as sin? When did it start getting defined as sin?
then God defined it.
Right. So when and how he applies that rule is when and how it applies.
Okay.
And he has that exclusive right. So that's the easy answer, or the simple answer. The more complicated, or not even really complicated answer is we don't have the full definition of everything the watchers did. We don't have the full definition of everything the watchers got to see from God. We can infer it comfortably by what we see in the book of Enoch and Jasher and all of that, and what happens with occultic magic. So we can see all the evidence of that. But those
Yeah.
aren't the evidences of the original things that the watchers got to see. So we do very generalized statements when we talk about that knowledge. Moses himself doesn't spell it out. He just says there was knowledge. The Nachash, the serpent, had knowledge. He doesn't even go into full detail. And I know that there is detail we can go into, but we don't even need to. The point is just they were given knowledge, understanding. Now, how much were they explained at that point of when and how God wants that to roll out? Well, that's more speculative that we don't really know. What we do know is that they overstepped a boundary and they used the knowledge they had without permission. And ironically, the way Moses places the creation story and the sin of Adam and Eve kind of mimics the exact same problem. Who's to say that Adam and Eve were never supposed to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? They couldn't very well become judges in the fullest sense if they didn't understand the difference between good and evil, could they? So I would suggest to you that at some point and in some way, they probably were going to eat from that tree.
Yeah.
How do I also know it? How does Jesus frame his death and what the disciples must do? Eat my body.
Yeah.
Isn't that just another metaphor for the tree of the garden?
Yeah.
Abide in me, branches. Looks to me like Jesus still got Eden in mind. So I hope it makes sense. So what I'm saying is that,
Yeah.
like the people I was mentioning that got their knickers in a knot and ran away from me. You know that one of those people constantly would say, "I'm trying to hide information from them."
Mm-hmm.
Neither do I hide anything from you.
No.
But there's a
Not
difference
at
between
all.
you and that person. You're still around,
That's true.
and they aren't. So I don't know. Looks like they're playing hide and seek. So
That's,
the point being, the teacher doesn't dance to the tune of the student. So if the watchers stayed in their lane, as I say, then things could have looked different. So effectively, the definition of witchcraft is everything that's good used outside of God's decision, timing. What else can I say? Sanctioning. Let's use the example of you
okay.
being at school with me. If you walked into a class and said, "Hey, I'm here in the name of Mr. Yonke, and you have to do this for me now," and the
Mhm.
kids come later to me and say, "So why did you tell Mr. Mazwai to do that?" And I say, "I don't know what you're talking about because I didn't tell him to do anything." Would you have acted right?
No, no.
I've oftentimes given you the permission to go into the tuck shop and get food on my name.
Mhm.
If you did that without me telling you to, would that be right?
No.
You see how that works. So
Yeah.
the funny thing is that it can be good or bad depending on the surrounding circumstance. Um, how you got to use my name, so to speak, at the school was always dependent on whether or not you were actually acting in with my permission to do so.
Yeah.
And didn't you feel quite safe when you were acting in alignment with what permission I gave you?
Yeah. What's coming to mind is that, and like you've explained, taught before, but an apostle, even Jesus being an apostle, there is freedom that the apostles allowed to have, like Abraham with his, I forgot his name now, his servant, his right hand man. Um, I felt the same way where I'd like basically you'd give me not carte blanche to teach us the whole class and discipline them, but I knew, knowing because I know we have a close relationship, I know what I'm not allowed to do and not to do, if that makes sense.
Right, yeah. You
So
understood the
yeah,
parameters.
no, you didn't need to spell out that you're not allowed to slap the children. I kind of figured that you never spelled that out or told me not to, but I can gather, even though I have authority that is not mine, that it's been given to me, there are parameters by your character that I can't do and do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and look at that other example. Remember that time there was that serious discipline issue with the grade 12s that had to stay for special detention with me. And I didn't
Yes,
give you much information. What did I tell you? I said to you, go and tell them to wait outside the classroom for me.
yeah.
Did I show up right away?
No, you didn't.
No, I deliberately stayed away longer to actually test their credibility, to test their resolve. You didn't break out into a panic and tell me you have to know more information. You went and you did it.
I don't need more information.
You see how that works? That's how trust works in a relationship.
Mm,
And you know how that turned out for those kids who took a chance and how that worked out. So this is how it goes. So if the watchers made that mistake of getting impatient and arrogant, and if people who have come to be discipled in terms of RBS by me have also been that impatient, who's actually losing out?
it's the disciples that walked away.
You see, so I mean, like, when you screw with the system effectively, it's you that misses out. That's kind of, I guess, the story.
So this would be, because the next question, well, the example I was going to say, it's the same thing as the Saul going to a medium and Samuel
Perfect.
being brought back. That technically was not allowed, or even the supernatural rebels couldn't do that. Only God could have done it.
Right. Which is why the witch gets a fright.
Yet, in even being hyper technical, God breaks his own rule. But no one, the authors or the writers, even Samuel, isn't exactly saying to God, "Why are you allowing this to happen? You said this isn't allowed." They just kind of go with it
Right.
because he allowed it.
I mean, Samuel's own response tells the story. Why have you woken me? He's like, come on, get with the program. You know what's supposed to happen here. What the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
So yeah, so God, to me, those lines, witchcraft effectively is God's stuff misused, the supernatural being misused.
And then my last question would be: you see in the Bible, and even afterwards in the Tanakh and the later writings, a good example I'm just going to use people like the prophets specifically. They are obviously naturally gifted and do supernatural elements and stuff like that. It seems they, because I think it's even, who's the guy who does the sacrifice and he destroys the prophets of Baal, and he even
Elijah.
points to Elijah. By Torah standards, um, you can only do a prophet in the temple. Prophet in the temple. You can only do a sacrifice in the temple. But because Elijah is a prophet, and I think you've explained, I remember you doing a teaching explaining the more in-depth role what a prophet, specifically a prophet of Israel, could do. It seems like the Israelites understood. So it would be more on the prophet to know how he can abuse or misabuse his power. Whereas in normal day Israelites couldn't really, I don't like, I'm trying to explain, like they couldn't really actively do witchcraft, if that makes sense, because they weren't in that realm, that supernatural connection.
Yeah,
And
they look, their attachment to witchcraft would be more secondary. If they were trying to manipulate things, they'd have to go to a prophet or someone like that. In which case, if the prophet engaged with him, the prophet would obviously be sinning as well.
yes.
So yeah, the reality is David's not a priest, yet he went into the tabernacle and ate and fed his men off the table of showbread. Like, I mean, what? Yeah, he did it. And God was okay with that.
So again, the line in the sand is always drawn and by God. That's basically it. We don't get to decide.
The shortest answer is exactly that, yes. In the case of David's story, I think the Torah can explain the answer well, that the preservation of human life would take precedence over anything else,
Yeah.
even cultic ritual in the tabernacle or temple. Um, and so the men were hungry. And Jesus even quotes that exact example when he talks about the disciples picking grain on a Sabbath. Now, Nanda,
Uh,
you know what it comes down to? Guess what? If you're not going to be a Torah expert, stay close to one. So good news for you is you're covered.
yeah, it makes sense now. It makes sense. Okay, well, this was pretty exciting. It's a pity I missed out on the first half, but I'll watch it again later on. But I don't know if you would ever do a teaching on it, but or is there even enough evidence in the Bible? Because I know just basically one of the rules, because a quick one that comes into my mind is the watchers, the supernatural beings, aren't omnipresent or so they
No,
can't be in many places at one time. They give the illusion that they are, but it's not the case. You see it in scripture. So it seems they have rules, whereas in God can be anywhere at any
Oh,
time.
yes, yes.
So that's I don't know if in Jewish understanding there's an understanding of what restrictions they have that they know of. Like we know we have restrictions like gravity and the laws of gravity and physics. What are their laws of gravity and physics? Or maybe we just don't. Or are there a few that are explained to us in scriptures? I don't know if it ever interested in us like talking about that or something.
Let me give you the shortest answer I can. There wouldn't even need to be a document to describe that. In just the natural order of how God has made them, they would run into invisible walls and knock themselves on, proverbially unconscious, quick enough to find those boundaries without anyone even needing to speak, which then automatically elevates God's supremacy and power even higher, because like without even speaking, he controls them.
Okay, I get what you're saying.
And I would suspect the higher you go, the more it moves into that realm, into that
Yeah,
unspoken reality. Like no one even needs to say it. You'll know where your boundary is, because you just won't get to cross over it.
I remember you and Rain were talking about I think 11 dimensions. I always thought it was just three or
Yeah.
four. And it was when I was watching it after you guys spoke about it. I went to go watch a physicist talk about them. Again, once he got to the 11th, 12th, I was like, I don't understand what the heck he's talking about now. But it started like basically all I was just basically understanding the rules were getting less and less and less as the
That's it.
dimensions were getting higher and higher. And it almost felt like a hierarchy, like something as low class angel could to be in the fourth, fifth, but someone God would be maybe even above the 12th or something like that, or maybe stuff like that. That's what was coming through my mind.
It's incomprehensible, which is like Carrie
Yes.
said, she doesn't want a God she can perfectly explain. That's probably the best way to explain the highest level of the supernatural. If you can explain him completely, then you've created him.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Another term under magic, I would put imagination.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah,
Perfect.
that's true.
That's perfect. Okay, closing off then, I'm going to say this, that reference of mine, I don't know if I must go and look some more, but I'm going to give you something to look at in the meantime. You could look at Isaiah. Let me just find it here now again. Yeah, Isaiah 60, verse 6 and 7. So I'm still convinced I found that there is a scripture that mentions Magi. But anyway, let's just say that I've misunderstood that. Isaiah 60, verse 6 and 7, so long, says the following: a multitude of camels shall cover you, the young camels of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba shall come, and here's the part from Isaiah: they shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall bring good news, the praises of the Lord. So there's at least just for now that reference. I'm still convinced I saw more than that, so I'll have to go and look properly. But there's clear reference to gold and frankincense coming, and obviously it not being Jewish people is the other point that I wanted to make.
On Wikipedia, Magi says they were priests in Zoroastrianism.
That's it. Yeah, that's right.
In Psalm 72, verse 19, there's a bunch of, it doesn't go and explain what gifts, but it says, may the kings of, gosh, these words are very, Tarnish and of the king and of the coastlands render him tribute. May the kings of Sheba and Sabah bring him gifts. May all the kings, and then goes on, may all the kings fall down before him, all nations serve him. But I don't know, this is a psalm written apparently by Solomon, so um, I know a lot of the apostolic writings take things that are even already fulfilled and assign them to Jesus just to drive the points across, like the Emmanuel quote. but that's a psalm. I don't know if maybe that's a psalm. I don't know what those nations are, but since
Those will
Psalms,
all be evidences of non-Jewish nations
yeah,
paying homage to a Messiah in Jerusalem. So that's perfect examples too.
yeah. So it's Psalms, and that's one of the psalm verses they gave me, Psalm 72, and I think it's also Psalms 62 also. So you can check that out.
Yeah, you'll find more. I'm just convinced that I saw one that actually mentions Magi, but I'll have to look more. To
But the
actually,
Magi's were kingmakers, though, in a way, also.
they
They
were
decided,
prophetic. They had political power. Yes,
yeah, they could decide who the king of. I forgot what the new Persia was called, but yeah.
definitely. Yeah. Okay, guys. It's very late for me and for Nande now, so I'm gonna
Well,
sign
thank
off.
you very much. It's been wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you to
Thank-
everyone, and we will get
yeah.
this online.
Thanks, Darren, and
Thanks,
everybody
Darren.
at the
Okay. Have a good day further, everyone.